So this is my first live, and I'm testing out the equipment and just really seeing how to use the interface. I'm up this morning doing some notes. I used this particular book as part of a curriculum. I'm going through and really updating some of my notes on it, and I thought I'd share. I made a post this morning that was about one of the excerpts in this book that really talks about the beginnings of understanding the paradigm shift and why you even want to. A little bit of history about this. I was in grad school. I've got a really kind of eclectic past, and one of the educational pursuits in the work of figuring out how we fix community was I ended up in seminary. Very unlikely. Like a whole lot of intersections of some of the things we talk about when we categorize Black women stereotypically. Like quite a few of those boxes I fit into, but my passion became, how do we fix what's going on around us? Like we talk about the problems, and I was working in a space. I was working as a consultant. This is back in my 20s. I was working with like community nonprofits and churches, and we were fixing stuff. You've got a food pantry, or you got dinners that you give out, or you got clothes you give out. And I saw a lot of church people sitting around and patting themselves on their back and saying, yeah, we're doing such a great job. And then I was like, well, what are you actually using as the standard of success? Like, are the people ever like getting food stable where they don't need you to feed them? Like, people 2 and 3 generations back in this community, and like you're not fixing the problem. And so part of my work was helping them fix problems, but they were oftentimes fixing one thing at a time. When you're developing a program, you're fixing usually one or sometimes a handful of problems. So let's say the children in your area are having literacy issues, and you decide to do a summer camp program this summer that specifically works on literacy of rising fourth graders, kids going from third grade to fourth grade. The statistics have said that's a problem, and you fix that problem. That fixes a problem. It provides some solutions. But like if you aren't fixing the issues at home, like the families and being involved in their education and helping to increase that literacy, are the parents reading to them at home? Are they encouraged reading? Like there's a whole lot of other things that have to be done at the same time. Sometimes even for the help that's being given to be to be reinforced. And so I started looking at that just kind of as a mental game. I like thinking. I like looking at a lot of data. I like finding solutions and creating programs that take you from point A to point B. And so I started looking at that and started realizing that if we're really going to fix community, all of those things are good things. Like none of those things in and of themselves are bad. But if we really want momentum, we have to be doing a lot of things at the same time. While you're helping this child learn how to read, does this parent have the economic freedom to be able to be at home when that child gets home, to be able to help go over the homework and to read to them at night? And do they have the emotional capacity to do that? Like, how do we fix many of those problems at the same time so that we get a really good fix? That this child is supported in so many ways that the effort that we're doing is paired with the other efforts that are happening in other ways. And so I started just watching. I started looking and seeing things that were working and things that weren't working. And I'm kind of a tinkerer. I like tinkering with all kinds of things. So people say, what are your hobbies? And I'm like, I have like 150 things on my hobby list. And as a result, like this to me was tinkering. But I was tinkering with like how to fix the future. How do we start doing things that help us see a more sustained change in what's happening in community? And as I began looking, I started realizing that some of the ways that we were doing social service, and I had to even really define that, like how social service really being a very broad term for helping people do things that they can't do for themselves. I happen to be involved in a lot of kind of grassroots community things, and oftentimes when you're dealing with services for people that are poor. Not that that's the only group of people that get social services in society, and I'd like to see us, change that we help people in a lot of ways on a community level. But I was dealing with poor people, and food and housing are really issues that come up over and over when you're dealing with that group. And it was, wait, why isn't this working? Just because someone's hungry and you feed them, like, shouldn't that be the fix? And it was like, no, it's not the fix. But I started looking at then, what's really happening when we talk about fixing the things that are wrong in community. Why aren't the services and the programs, why aren't they giving us sustained change? And I started realizing that part of it was about some of the dynamics of change, and that being willingness and the value base. If I'm trying to change someone or see change in behavior, but the person's values don't align with the kind of changes that I'm talking about, like we've got an impasse. And so short of forcing someone in a chokehold to change, which is kind of what we do when we use behavior modification techniques, we don't really put people in a chokehold, but we do things like, I'll give you these goodies if you do what I want you to do. And as long as the goodies are good enough, as long as it's something I want, I might change that behavior. But if the incentive goes away, if I haven't had a transformation in my values, I go back to the old behavior. Or I punish you for doing something that I don't want you to do. Behavior modification, I started realizing, was not a sustainable solution. It's relevant. We need to stop some behaviors, and behavior modification is kind of one of the ways that we do it. We punish you for doing things socially that are not good for a community. If you come to my house and come into my house uninvited and take my stuff, we have behavior modification. But we have behavior modification when we don't agree on the values. That's how we punish you, or that's how we have some sort of standard. But in the social space, what I began to see was the greatest return on the investment as far as community energy and investment in people. It was when there was a change in values. I saw where if a family was struggling, and maybe they were struggling to feed themselves, if this was a family whose value system says, we know it's our responsibility, we know this is our job and we can't do it, we need a little bit of help. That person oftentimes, or that situation oftentimes, warranted a much greater return for the help the community gave. And that was very different than someone who felt it was my responsibility to provide that. If I'm responsible for providing food for you and I continue to provide that food for you, it reinforces that value system that says, well, I don't have to do it for myself. And so I started looking at value transformation, and I realized that that was a critical piece for change. Like, we're trying to get people to change, but like, why are we asking them to change? We're trying to get their value system to shift into a different kind of value system. And I started looking at how then we do that, because changing values is a big task. I think that's why it's so hard to do community shifting. Changing values takes work. It's not something that you just make a rule list. And we've attacked lots of problems like this, and there are benefits. When people, segregation or the Jim Crow laws is one of those ways that we put behavior modification in place. But in the midst of that, if value transformation doesn't happen, then you have to have those rules in place to kind of keep people in behavior. When the transformation happens, then people no longer want to do the behavior, and the behavior corrects itself. And so part of my quest to figure out how we fix community, part of that was the most sustainable way of fixing things is to figure out how we can help people do transformation. We attack it in a lot of ways. Those that are really community advocates, we oftentimes attack problems using the behavior modification models. And in my work in community, I just have found it to be exhausting. It's like putting those controls and having to continue to have those controls to moderate behavior. And I said, that's important, but at the same time, how do we do transformation? Because a lot of things we see are symptoms. We talk a lot about issues, and I've only been on TikTok for a while, but in the short time that I've been here, I've heard a lot of conversations about racism. Racism's a real issue. But if we want to get to healing, I start looking at how do we go deeper. Racism is a symptom of something. Anytime I need someone else to be worse or less than me, especially when I base it on arbitrary things like the color of skin I was born into, or where I live, or my income levels, rather than other things like how I treat people, the character kind of stuff. That became a piece of kind of some insight of, wait a minute, if I begin shifting my values, my behaviors begin to change, and that just feels more sustainable. So at the same time, let's deal with the issue of why we need to be better or someone to be less than us. Because if I fix that issue, then we not only address racism, we address all kind of phobias and isms that we have, whether it's towards the LGBTQIA plus community, whether it's towards poor people, whether it's the black versus white thing, whether it's an issue of which country you come from or which religion you practice, what faith tradition you practice. If we begin finding solutions that address and tackle the core issues, then all of those fires that we're fighting, racism and all of the other isms, and we have like a long list of things because we find reasons to make one person better than another or one group better than another. Yeah, that's and in the comments, and I'm not really moderating those as well, but part of it is how do we fix like people are useless. Issue. Good morning. Good morning. Tapping in. I don't even know how to use that, so it's going to do whatever it's going to do. If that's the whole match thing, do you have something that you wanted to add to the conversation? Yeah, I don't think there's really anything that you are adding to the conversation. So let me see if I can. You've given me a good opportunity to try and learn the technology. So if someone's in the chat box that can help me, this is my first live. So knowing how to unhook people from the live. So can someone give me some insight on how the platform works if I want to unhook someone from the live? Let's see. Nope, don't know. Don't know. So I'm looking if there's anyone that can help me with that to know how you take people down from the feed once they've come in. Does anyone know how to do that? Yeah, hey Guy, how are you? If you have something to add, feel free to jump in. If not, I'm gonna see if I can figure out how to disconnect you. Do you have something to add to the conversation about healing community and social relationships? So, I'm gonna look and see if I can learn. This is a great experience to see if I can figure out how to maneuver the platform. So I'm learning how to, and so I'm not seeing how to do the connect. Now, I don't know where he is. Does anyone that's gone live know how to actually disconnect people from the co-hosting? If someone can give me some pointers in the chat room, that would be awesome. Like how to actually take someone off of the screen when they come in. It looks like there's quite a few. Let's see, let me go to settings. And I'm going to, oh, I don't know how to do this. So let's see if I can go at this another way. And Let's see. Okay. And don't know how that's going to work. So if someone, you can pin a comment now. So if someone knows how do I unhinge someone from the space, I'm learning how to use the controls. So does anyone know how I unhinge that viewer from the live feed? So if anyone's got some technical assistance that can help me with this, to know how to unhinge someone from the connection feed. So yeah, I don't know how to do that. So as long as he's not disruptive, I'm going to kind of just let it go unless he becomes disruptive. And so because I don't know how to fix it, let's see, yeah, Google it. How to delete someone from the TikTok live feed. So as I said, this is my first time doing live, so I'm not sure of all the ins and outs of how to work it. And this is one of those things of knowing how to add in or subtract someone out from the feed.
Welcome, my friend. Welcome. Please like, please share. Send me gift, please. Send me gift, please.
User, let's see. Hey, Guy, can you exit off? Nope, he's not. So let's see. I'm going to try to delete this because there's a lot of that stuff that's not relevant. But figuring out how to get him off the feed is what I'm trying to do. And so I'm learning how to do this because he won't even mute. He just want it to be visible. Says click. Yeah, I'm on the bottom. I've got. Hi, friend. I'm trying to disconnect you. Can you disconnect yourself?
Goodbye.
Thank you. Are you going to disconnect for me?
Bye.
Okay, I'm on host and I see where I have him joined in. I'm going to click on that. I'm going to manage it and I'm going to block. Confirm. Yep. Figured it out. I now know how to disconnect someone from the feed. So anyways, back to really talking about community and where this book comes in. One of the things in trying to understand change dynamics was, how do you do effective social triage and really understand the characteristics of change? And this book really talks about paradigm shifting. It's a business book, but he talks about how to anticipate the future. And this morning, one of the things he talks about is using some basic principles in trying to understand the future before there's a crisis. Because oftentimes when a major shift happens, like the rules for functioning, the rules surrounding whatever the issue is that's having a shift change. One of the biggest paradigm shifts I think that's happened in COVID, or one of the paradigm shifts that I've seen happening or emerging in COVID, was before COVID, like working from home was something that was not widely available to a lot of employees. Like the standard paradigm was you get up, you drive, you commute into somebody's office, and you do your work there. Well, COVID happened, and usually some sort of crisis is usually the fastest shifter of paradigm. And within just a very short period of time, all of a sudden, the entire paradigm about that changed. Zoom became something that was a common phrase, a common name for people. And all of a sudden, jobs figured out a way for people to be at their homes and still functioning in the workplace. That was a paradigm shift. Like the whole rules for work, the expectations shifted. And this talks about that in times of turbulence, when there's times of turbulence, if you're able to anticipate dramatic changes early on, it gives you a much better chance of success. If Jobs had anticipated the COVID happening, and that's just one example, but if companies had anticipated what was happening, whoever could anticipate that best and do it before the crisis, they would typically have the best chance for success in moving through the crisis to the next positive in or the next norm. And so he talks about that. And one of the things I realized was as he began explaining this concept, I realized that it really did apply to social shifts. And he talks about being able to really see the trending and what's happening. And I think we're seeing some of that. And I started realizing that it could be a really valuable tool. Hi to all those that are coming in. It's my first live, so I'm really testing out the platform and learning some of the features of how to use it. I'll be on a little bit. I'm in the middle of some note taking on this book that I use in one of the classes that I teach. But to really talk about paradigm shifts and some of the components that Joe Barker gives that I think are really good overlays for social shifts. So he talks about being able to really understand our perceptions about understanding our own perceptions about what we see. And some of these ways of thinking, he talks about divergent thinking and convergent thinking skills that help you to discover more than the right answer. When we're trying to figure out solutions for society, like it's really difficult for me to see finding one solution that works for everyone. It's very difficult to have a society where we are diverse. Whether we like the diversity or not, we are diverse. It's very difficult to have a one-size-fits-all solution for community. And so being able to think divergently about multiple solutions, many right answers. Also being able to take in the data. What are we seeing around us that becomes some of the data points for finding solutions, and then having the ability to be able to prioritize which of this information is more important. We now have access to more information than I've ever had this kind of free access to in my life. Like literally someone said, just Google it. Like I have a question about something technically specific to my life right now. And within a few seconds, information comes up that gives me options. It may give me written text or several videos about that. And so being able to prioritize the data that we're taking in to know what's relevant in helping us find solutions, but also being able to map solutions, like what do we see now in society? What are the problems? And then what is it we're thinking the solutions look like? And like, how do we get from where we are right now in society to where we see us wanting society to be? Like, how do we expect to live a generation from now? Like, are these norms and the problems that we have, like, how do we solve those problems? And being able to map out, well, how do we actually get there? So we see that healing is an issue. We see that people's behavior is an issue. Well, how do we help that transform to get us to the kind of society that we're envisioning? Or do we just crash and burn? The mapping piece is one of the things that he says is a part of being able to successfully navigate the future. And then imagining, like, can you see what the future looks like? And are you able to, in models, in drawings, map this exploration process? Because I think that exploration process is one of the ways that we find solutions. And so he talks about identifying the characteristics of people who possess those kinds of skills. And he also talks about that being a really important part of getting ahead of the paradigm shift. And in trying to understand paradigms and how it shifts and what that overlays for society, I think of, like, who are the paradigm shifts within my frame of understanding? And one of the paradigm shifters, as he explains it, the ones that are usually thinking very big and broad and really tinkering with the future, one of the ones that I think of commonly is Nikola Tesla. I think about the time frame that over 100 years ago, this guy was thinking about things and solutions for energy and he was probably a tinkerer, so probably a whole lot of other things that the applications of his tinkerings probably would have given us insight into. And I look at the ways that that information was kind of shut down back then. And then I realized, like, what typically happens from the model that Joe Barker gives is paradigm shifters oftentimes are onto something way before the rest of us are. And so I think about that and I look at that and go, wait, what would have happened if his line of thinking had been supported? Would we be having the conversations about environmentalism that we're having now that are directly as the result for some of the choices that were made as to how we were going to do power as this country developed? And I realized that the model that he talks about, the way that Nikola Tesla was addressed by society was very much how paradigm shifters are typically approached when you're in that tension between an old paradigm that's dying and a new paradigm. One of the things that I really didn't understand, I'd heard people use that term even 20 years ago when I started dabbling with this kind of information and learning some new vocabulary. People talked about paradigm shift like this, a gradual slide. And he gave a really different picture of how paradigms move. And what he said was paradigms die. Eventually, the current paradigm stops answering the problems and providing the solutions for the group that the paradigm is working for. And that paradigm eventually gets to the point where it no longer is working well enough, and people say we got to do things a different way. What happens is there usually is a new emerging paradigm that's really strange and not really popular, but it begins meeting some of the needs that aren't met by the existing paradigm. And eventually it gets to the point where it's too painful to stay in the old set of rules, the old paradigm, and people move to that new paradigm because it's gotten better at solving the problems in society. And I think one of the major things that I see as it relates to paradigm shifts is we are moving into a new way of doing life. There's certain things and the ways we used to do things that were okay for my mother's generation and my grandmother's generation that aren't okay for me anymore. And some of that was a point of tension. My mother was of the mindset that you graduated from high school, you went to college, you went and worked for a job, and you stayed at that job until you retired. Like that was the paradigm that she lived. She got an education because as a black woman, her mother did not want her to be a domestic. And so being a domestic was the main option that she saw for work. And so for my mother, she wanted her to have a better opportunity. And so she supported my mother going to college. My mother really did it herself because I don't think she financially supported and probably wasn't as emotionally supportive, just knowing the dynamics of my mother and grandmother. But for my mother, having education was her way out. It was her way into that professional class, into the middle class kind of lifestyle where she had a house in, a commuter community in the Bay Area of Northern California. And she went to work, 5 days out of the week. And so she had weekends off and she had a car and we took vacations sometimes. And so we were kind of, back in my day, we thought we were middle class. So as a result of that, her paradigm, we grew up where my mother preached, you finish high school and you go to college because you need at least a bachelor's degree to be able to have a fair shake. And so I grew up with that being part of my paradigm. I grew up with the paradigm that many who grew up kind of in this cultural thing called blackness got, that you had to be better to be able to be even on the same playing field as everyone else. So excelling was almost an expectation. I remember getting in trouble for getting B's. But as I grew up, education was part of my journey. I like learning. But I remember this was just expected. It wasn't even a second thought. And so my brother, who was not a good student, when he did not do education, he was kind of bucking the system. those were some of those ideals, though, that weren't the same kind of ideals that I instilled in my children. I was entrepreneurial minded. And so my education was important, but being able to be a good business person was important. And a lot of that I didn't get from my formal education. And so I began to live life under a different paradigm that was really conflicted. My mother was really conflicted about that because I also had a mother who felt like her way of doing things was what I should adopt and embrace. And so for me, in my family dynamic, I was the one that was really kind of the paradigm shifter in that regard. And I was in several other areas where I didn't follow the norm. But then I began realizing that it was solving some problems in my own life that I was seeing others impacted with. Peers of mine who get up and go to jobs that they hate, and they're in that hamster wheel cycle of you're supposed to get an education and you go to a job and you don't have to like the job, but the job will pay the bills and you just kind of keep doing that. Well, my life was a little bit different from that. And so I kind of reflected on this model as a tool that has helped me not only understand where I fit in, because what it helped me to learn was I'm maybe thinking about things that aren't visible right now as a problem for society. And this is some of the work I've done with community development. But I understand that eventually it's going to be a problem. And so if we start finding solutions now for something that we could reasonably foresee being a problem in the future, how much better are we at dealing with it when the shift happens? Because usually major paradigm shift, it's a crisis. He says crisis shifts paradigms faster than anything else. And so what this book helped me to do was really learn more about myself. He groups the paradigm players in society, in business. I overlay it in society, but the reference is that you have three groups. You have the shifters. They're the ones that are usually thinking about stuff before it even looks like you need to be thinking about it. Like, why are you thinking about this kind of stuff? Because I used to get that a lot. 20 years ago when I was talking about, housing and was tinkering with this idea called micro housing. Now a fad has picked up like years later that was the tiny house movement. We were talking about it for different reasons about like how do we help people buy their economic freedom? What if we had smaller houses that cost less and people could buy their freedom so that they didn't have to stay on that hamster wheel? But we were thinking about those things well before it. We were talking about some of the national kinds of crisis, some of the societal kind of crisis when it wasn't really popular and some things didn't even give indication, but we were kind of thinking through like what's the future going to be and how do we start finding fixes for things that look like they're beginning to break in society. And so he talks about that group, but he also says there's a group called pioneers. They're not the ones that are out there way on the front side thinking about these things, but if you find pioneers that have a little more grounding into the current paradigm, that relationship between a shifter and a pioneer is very valuable because they are the ones that help shifters take theoretical ideas and put it into the practical space. And there's huge value in that. Shifters are the theoretical ones. They're the tinkerers. They're prototyping stuff. They're playing with things. And that includes socially, not just kind of in the technical space where it sometimes is much more easy to understand. But they're tinkering with things. But tinkerers are really good at upsetting society if you let tinkerers loose. You've got an idea, you think it might work as far as the social programming, and so you unleash it on your whole community. Whoa, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. So oftentimes taking things from the theoretical of a shifter into the practical, you need someone who's really grounded in the current paradigm, but who also has resourcing, who has credibility, to be honest. To be able to partner. But usually these are people who are really, it's like the idea makes sense. I see where you're going, even if I don't understand it, that will get behind a shifter and say, I see where you're going. I don't understand all the details because you got a lot going on in here, a lot of data, a lot of these pieces from that exploration that you're doing. But I believe enough in that I'm willing to put a little support behind that and see if we can't take this into the practical kind of application. But then there's a settler group, and there's a very important part of that because that is the group of people that typically maintain the homeostasis, maintain the balance of the current paradigm. And there's value in that. The insight that I got from that was all of those players are important. You need those that are moving at 100 miles an hour. You need those that are moving at 55 miles an hour. And then you need those that are moving at 2 or 3 miles an hour. And I started learning that none of those players is bad, but they're different. Not everyone's going to be on the very front end ready to shift on just kind of a whim and an idea. There are some people that need to move into some of our social systems that are already set in place. There's value in that. But I also understood that a shifter and a settler have two different focuses. The shifter is intentionally trying to upset the homeostasis. They're trying to radically change things kind of in an out-of-a-box way. It might not be the way that things are done now, but they say, what if we just rebuilt the whole system? What would that look like? And how would we do that? And how would we implement that? Let's leave the old system there. Let's decide that it's not worth the energy to kind of keep putting Band-Aids on it because it's going to just die. Let's create new systems. That may be difficult for someone that's in the slower part of the change, slower end of the change speed of a paradigm shift. But if we understand each other and we understand that each of us has value and we learn how to interact, then I can be fully myself. If I'm one of those think tank people that's always thinking, I'm thinking about 30 years from now. Like, what are we creating that's going to be 30 years from now? That if I understand that and understand that the place of that, it's not to convince the masses. Because this is theoretical. We're talking about ideas. If I begin to understand that and I respect both sides of that paradigm shift, then I think we end up in society with a real powerful vehicle for change because we're not spending the energy in conflict. I understand that someone who may not be ready to kind of tinker with a new way of doing right now in my life, I have a transitional housing program. It's way outside of the box. It's a transitional housing program that's an unsubsidized program. The individuals have to pay not only for their housing and their utilities, but they have to pay for the life coaching services we do that include healing work. And we make it affordable so that individuals on very low incomes, like a fixed Social Security budget, can afford the housing that we have in a community that has relatively high housing prices. When I began this program or began the development, I had people say, "Oh, you can't do this unsubsidized. People can't afford to pay for this program like it is. You're gonna have to go get grants." And I was like, "Okay, I'm talking to the wrong people. Let me talk to the zoning person. Let me make sure I have the legalities in place so that I can do it without having some legal repercussions. But I understand that you don't think it can be done. I'm a numbers person. I think it can be done, and I'm willing to go do it." And we're a year and a half in with someone graduating into our Step 2 program where we've seen them moved from housing scarcity or really instability, homelessness. Like, we have people that get into the homeless arena and hotel living is like you can't make enough to get out of that loop once you get into it sometimes in our community, especially after COVID and the moratorium on housing that left landlords really less they've left less leeway for individuals. In my community, if your income's not 3 times the rent, if you don't have a minimum 600 credit score and no eviction history, not even an eviction filed on your report, oftentimes you cannot qualify for housing. That's challenging for a lot of people, especially if you've gotten into financial situations and you have lost your housing. Because even if they file an eviction, even if you move out of the rental place and they filed an eviction, that shows up, and some landlords won't even touch you. So I had some people, because I was really careful who to share it with, but some people that are in my social circle that are on the slower end of the paradigm shift. And they said, it can't be done. And I was like, okay, I'm on the other end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go do it. And then we can talk about whether or not it can be done. I'll have proof of concept that we really can. And so we were able to put the pieces in place, and we've been able to successfully do that. That's outside of the norm of my community. And so because I understood some of the dynamics, it didn't have me stop anyone else from doing housing programming in the way that was meeting some needs. Some of the housing shelter, the homeless shelter in our community, and some of the other programs that are based, deal with housing. I didn't want to stop any of that because all of that's good work. I was looking for, can we find some better solutions? Can we find some better solutions that don't rely on the continuous need for grant funding? Because grant funding is great, especially if it's used as seed money, but grant funding takes energy. It takes energy to write the grants and the administrative work on the backsides if you get the grants and just a lot of that. And I retired recently and didn't want to put that energy into it. And so there's got to be better ways. And I'm really big on sustainable programming, like not perpetuating some of the problems that we see. Like if your organization continues to need funding over and over again, for some of the programming, can we find ways to be able to fund it in ways that are much more sustainable? And so this was the quest for, can we fix, for some people, this is not a fix for everything, can we fix some of the homelessness issues in the community in a way that might look different, but that is as effective or perhaps more effective? And so if I had spent my time arguing with those who were at another end of the change spectrum. They're looking at moving slower, incrementally making changes, where I'm just like, throw the system out. Let's see if we can make this work. The numbers work. Theoretically, it works. Let's see if we can make it work in real time. And because I have learned some of those differences, it has helped me to not spend my energy fighting with people when both of us are right. And I think that's the piece that he talks about as being able to understand divergent thinking, that the thinking skill necessary for discovering more than one right answer. And so he hits the nail on the head when he talks about that, because I have found that to be real characteristic of my temperament type. I would classify myself in that shifter category as it relates to things around sustainable community development. I'm not a shifter in some other areas of my life. I'm a settler. I am not going to change. I'm going to get with my routine on some things in my life. And I'm going to ride them to the end. Like, I will probably never change my cell phone company unless they just go out of business. Like, thinking that through, I'm the one that's not a shifter when it comes to technology. My kids laugh at me because I am so Android. And I just tell them, I don't want to learn something new. I don't want to put my energy into learning that. I'm going to be I'm preparing to be one of those senior citizens that has a batch of information related to technology where I just don't know. My grandkids will have to teach me. My children will have to teach me or do it for me. I'm planning to be one of those people in some areas of technology where I'm like, I just don't know how to do that. Kind of like me exiting the guy off of this thing. Like, I just don't know how to do that. And I just don't want to spend the energy learning. So I'm just going to be dysfunctional in this area. Like some areas of my life, I am very much a settler. I will be the absolute last one to change, and I will be at the brink of, the paradigm will have to be at the brink of dying for me to change in some of those areas. Like Android will have to stop making Android phones, and my phone will have to die. And then I will still consider another option. Like, can I do it on my Chromebook? Because I know how to use that before I shift over to something else. But as it relates to community building, I'm one of those tinkering shifters. And some of the paths that has led me down for a shifter have been absolutely fabulous. I just retired. I was a farmer for the last decade of my life. But I also ran a farm-to-table restaurant at this farm that had a campground, and we built tiny houses that were able to run off grid, and I had a bubble ball soccer field, and, I raised quail and did a whole bunch of other things with local agriculture infrastructure. But I did that after going to seminary, after being a consultant, and all of these tinkerings, because I was trying to figure out how the moving parts of community work. I would not recommend that life for a lot of people. I would not, unless change is something you do for a hobby, I would not recommend that. But for shifters, and in my life, I have crossed paths with some shifters. We are a quirky bunch of people who experiment with life. Our whole life is a social experiment, and it's usually 17 social experiments going on at the same time. But I understand that for shifters, we need that kind of input. We are always tinkering with something. And there is is a group of people, there's a segment of the population who are shifters who have been tinkering with what's the future going to look like and how do we create the bridge to get from where we are to where we would like to go or where society needs to go. And for me, I think that's been a valuable work because I see two options. Either society's going to crash and burn, and I'm talking specifically about American society. I live part-time in the United States. I'm born and raised. I'm a U.S. citizen. I live in the South now. I didn't grow up in the South, but I've lived all of my adult life now in the South, currently in South Carolina. And like, even if American society crashes and burns, what's next? You know, like, yeah, I see a deterioration. I see some spiraling in our American society. But even if we crash and burn, there still is a what's next. And for me, it's like, okay, so if it's not just crash and burn and it's all over, if there's always going to be some next, then shouldn't we start figuring out the solutions for how to do it better? You know, shouldn't we figure out how to live without some of the isms that we have? Shouldn't we figure out how to do things that are a bit more equitable to like the universe? Because like we need air and water and land to grow food. So for me, it's like if hopelessness is not the option, if like just crash and burn and it's all over is not what I'm willing to accept, then I felt like the only logical thing to me is about, well, then you got to start figuring out solutions, you know? And so it changed my mindset where I don't spend as much time like just complaining about what I see. Instead, I'm much more of an observer where I'm watching to see what's happening, but I'm watching to see what's happening because that gives me insight as I look at how we build bridges to a new way of living. And part of what this tool has given me is it's really helped me. And the book is Paradigms by Joe Barker. It's probably in reverse, but I'm sure you can kind of transpose that. It's an older book about business that I feel is a really good overlay. If you understand his concepts and then take that and look at society through this platform of, you know, how paradigms shift and who the players are, it has been the best tool for really understanding social paradigm shifts because it's spot on. Like it is spot on for explaining like, okay, how is this going to go down? Oh, if that's a settler, they're going to fight to the end to keep their current paradigm in place. Oh, they're going to fight hard. This is a death fight because that paradigm's dying. Oh, let me watch and see what happens. Let me see who the shifters are that are saying we got to do differently and they're already in motion versus those that are on the backside and are still in that mode of just kind of being in that. And so it's been a tool for me to help understand myself better, but also to give me ways of being able to interact with others that are in ways that are not judgmental, where I can respect everyone and their place and understand the difference. What that's meant for me personally is it has changed the people that I get involved with, especially surrounding programming. When you're kind of thinking, playing with solutions, social solutions that are outside of the box, it can be painful to work with people that are at the other end because the motivation is oftentimes different. If I'm working with someone whose motivation is like maintaining things the way they are, and I'm talking about throwing that out the window and trying something different, like there's never a common ground for us. And so we can both be doing things that are beneficial and yet not be doing things together. And so I have found that I gravitate more towards working with people who have the characteristics that Joel describes as paradigm shifters and pioneers. Like those are people that are usually I find camaraderie with. We are the ones that people say things like, oh, you guys think too much. And then we say, no, we think like we think. We just are people that spend a lot of time thinking, you know, and in the circle of people who are very similar in temperament, others that I have found in various sectors of work that I've done that are shifters and pioneers, like we're the same. They may be a deep thinker about a different area, and I love to work with people in different areas. Systems stuff may be one. One of the buddies that I've worked with a decade or so ago, we were doing a lot of stuff and a lot of writing. Loosely now is a guy named Vinay Gupta. He's involved with Materium now, and I don't know the blockchain thing all that well, but he and I were doing some writing work together, and we were thinking about doing some consulting work together, and he gave me a whole new insight into, oh gosh, systems and the government systems and organizational systems as far as looking at community. But he also gave me really good models for some of the survival training that I do. And so he has an article that's probably on the internet somewhere because he's real good about making his stuff available. And it's called 6 Ways to Die. Not the greatest title. I think I write better titles than him for things. But it's called 6 Ways to Die. And he gives a model for the levels of responsibility when we start talking about community and community systems, the individual personal level, the family level, the community level, the regional level, the greater systems level, and the global systems level. The models that he has, I use not just for survival training that I do of, how do you learn the practical skills so that these 6 ways to die don't take you out in the middle of a crisis. And there's some practical answers for that. But in modeling community, when we're looking at issues, can we look at them on all these different layers? Because when we're developing programming, you need to be able to address issues on a variety of layers. If I'm dealing with things like personal safety, your housing is part of your safety, but your clothes are your first layer of defense. And then we go up from there out of the individual level, your home, but safety at the next level, is community safety. And what are the things we have in place? Well, in most places you have a police department and you have some sort of criminal justice system and you have laws and rules and regulations that give you gives you kind of the unifying force in a community. Even if we don't share values, these laws apply to both of us. These are the rules that we're each going to be held accountable to. And we use behavior modification. If you don't follow the rules, then we punish you. There's some form of punishment for not following the rules. But being able to see that modeling, and he's one of those shifter kind of people, tinkering with ideas way back then that were not popular. And so it's kind of like the mad social scientists that come together, the technology people and social science people and agriculture people and some farmers and some consultants and people that just want to think about this stuff. And so I found that understanding how the paradigm shifts and understanding those different groups of players has given me tools of having the tree, I call it social triage, being able to see and understand by listening to someone whether or not they're going to be a compatible fit, especially when I'm talking about programming or business partnerships. And so I use this quite a bit in making decisions for my life. It's become one of the tools that's been really instrumental in my life of knowing how to align with people that are not only like-minded, but that have the temperaments to work in the same space as it relates to change. I love doing program development and design. I like designing programs and really thinking about the kinds of values and changes you're trying to affect in the people that your programming is for. But I also like to do the big heady thinking. I like to look at all the data and go way far back and do this data dump with all kind of information as it relates to community, housing and food. Well, food is about agriculture and retail and learning about local food and education and a whole bunch of other things and economics and land ownership and foodways and a whole bunch of other things. I like thinking about all of those things at the same time. And so knowing that about myself and understanding that about the characteristics of a shifter, when I see others that I see those characteristics in, it's like, oh, those are my people. Those are my people. We could get in a room and we could nerd out for hours doing this theoretical thing. We can have the wall board and have notes and things, and we can jump from topic to topic to topic to topic. But I also understand that there's some people that would drive nuts, that neither one of us is bad, but that we have a different place in the way we operate within this paradigm dynamic. And understanding that has allowed me to gain a much better respect, but also to understand the points of tension. To understand that in certain audiences, the stuff I'm talking about sounds like far-fetched. The area that I'm in now, like I retired to be able to follow some of my other passions, and healing is one of those. And I hear people say, well, you can't get people together and work together. And I'm like, what if we could figure that out? Oh, well, you can't do healing. What if I could figure that out? Like, what if we had solutions there where we could? Like, would that change the conversation? If we could help people learn how to increase their emotional intelligence and give them a framework where they could learn that they had better processing skills for life so that life wasn't so continually traumatizing to them. What if we could figure out better conflict resolution tools that helped us learn how to help people learn how to get along so that we could even have the conversations with each other that we need to have to be able to maybe do a better job at collective healing? Like, what if we could? Like, if we could figure out those things, would our conversations be different? Like, there's a group of people that want to have those conversations, and I am. I've spent my life kind of like looking at like, what are the solutions? If we could find those solutions, wouldn't that like totally change the game? And so I've spent 20 years like, let's find those solutions. Let's figure out how we do sustainable value transformation. Let's figure out how we do healing. Let's figure out better ways to do commerce. Let's figure out better ways to do food. Let's figure out better ways to do social services and community. Like, let's find those solutions. And one of the examples he gives that like is a really good example of that is in this, again, this book Paradigms by Joel Barker. He's speaking from a business perspective, but I think it has a really keen overlay on social paradigms. But he gives an example of a company, and they get this new guy into the company, and he's this bright youngster that's got potential, and he's like just raring to go. And the guy says, you know, he tells the story that the owner or the manager, the CEO, whatever, that's talking to this guy has a list of problems that they just can't solve. They're the unsolvable problems for their industry. And he says with every new employee, he says, here's a set of problems. See if you can fix one of them. And he never expects that somebody's going to find them because these are the unsolvable problems. He says, but one day, a new employee comes in, them, you know, just like raring to go, and he gives them this list of unsolvable problems. And one day, this young guy comes in and he solves one of the problems. And he brings a solution into the owner, and the guy says, there's no solution for this problem. And the guy's like, yeah, I got a solution. Here, try it out. And like the solution works. That's kind of the idea of kind of how paradigm shifters work. And for me, like I have spent a good part of my adult life like playing that role in society. Like, what if we could fix the things that people say we can't fix, that we all know are the problem? Like every conversation that I hear in the few weeks that I've been on TikTok, like centers to like, we got dysfunction. Like the reason why this stuff is happening is because people are dysfunctional. And it's like, what if we could fix that? Like, what if we could help people have a way not to be dysfunctional? Like, if we could fix that, then, like, we'd start a whole different conversation at that point. But until we kind of, like, have solutions there, like, our conversation is still, like, how do we put a Band-Aid on this? How do we minimize the damage that this is causing in society or to our environment or to whatever? And so the shifters that he described are really the players in society that if we support it, we might get some of those unsolvable problems solved. And so it's just been a really good tool that has given me just another layer in my another tool in my toolbox for being able to kind of understand society and being able to understand my place in it, but also being able to understand the dynamics of change and strategizing. I like the idea of being strategic in our solutions. And he says, if you support paradigm shifters and pioneers, you'll get a much faster and much less painful paradigm shift. Like that's the ultimate. Like if we had supported the Teslers, you know, what would that have meant for society? We probably would not be in the same situation we are with our environmental condition. We would have probably been in a very different space with our economics because power is one of those things that is a huge economic wheel. And people that are in place to benefit from that don't want that will to change. So we're kind of at a tension point. But what if we had supported that line of idea instead of the alternative line, the DC current way of power that has become our standard? And then here we are 100 years later going back saying, you know what, maybe we should go back and revisit that idea now, because maybe the way that we went, that path we took, was not the best route. And we're going back and we're literally trying to uncover that thought process in developing solutions for the next 100 years. So it's been a helpful tool. I have been in a personal exploration to find tools that help with how we heal some community, how we make the next shift in how we live. I hope that what the future looks like for my grandchildren's children is a lot different than what it is right now. Like, that's my hope, because I realize that change is a really slow thing sometimes, in relative speaking. Like me, I want it to be changed. Can we put it on a 3 to 5 year, 5 to 8 year plan for like really re-pioneering society? In reality, I know it's a much slower change than that. But I think if we support the shifters in our society in the various sectors that they're in, and I think if we begin to do that more and more, I think we could begin really making greater momentum in the change towards something that really is about a regenerative work with society. Like, I have hope for that. And because I understand the principles and I think they're appropriate, paradigms move like a pendulum. And so sometimes that pendulum swings and it gets all the way up to the end of that crescendo before it comes back down, you know? And that unfortunately sometimes means that things get worse before it gets better. Things get worse until there's a major crisis, and crisis is one of the things that shifts paradigms faster than anything else. So, you know, I have a very hopeful optimism, but at the same time, it's understanding the way that paradigms move and being able to see that sometimes things look like they're getting worse, but that really is the symptoms of a dying paradigm. And that gives me kind of this passion to move even faster, because if things are getting worse, that means there's going to come a point where there's really a crisis where people say, okay, nope, no more. We're not doing this dysfunction anymore. And those that have been working towards the solutions for those unsolvable problems should probably, like, if we began working on that before the crisis, we've got a much greater chance at success. And that's what he talks about in really understanding the paradigms, that if you begin doing the work and supporting the work of figuring out what the new future is going to be before that crisis and that major shift happens, you have a much greater chance of success. Because finding solutions when you're not in the midst of crisis is so much better than having to find solutions in the midst of it. It's kind of like we got stuck in some communities when COVID hit with like, oh my goodness, we're not ready. But there were some communities that were, you know, and those communities that were already ready for crisis, not specifically COVID, but for crisis, like they could move food to their people if their people weren't at work and needed food. They could, you know, make sure that some of their seniors were taken care of. And like, if preparations took place, those that weren't, they jumped into it. But man, how much more robust would the solutions have been if there had been work done in advance of the crisis hitting? And so for me, I really look at that in society for what if we are not at the worst stage of that paradigm, that pendulum swing, and we start working on solutions to some of those problems that right now seem unsolvable. And for me, the core of that is we got to heal people. We got to help people heal. The fake it till you make it mindset is being played out. We're seeing it in all areas of our community. We're seeing people run out of coping skills for life. And the ways that they translate are things like, I don't know what words I can say on here, but suicide rates are escalating in some very specific groups of people in our community, different segments. And people are at the breaking point where we don't know how to process what's happening in life. So we're inching upon this crisis, and all of the behavioral kinds of things we see, like it all comes back to like healing. And it's like, yeah, but we can't do healing. We don't have to do that in a community basis. We can't really figure out solutions for that. And it's like, but we got to, like, we have to, like, I know maybe we don't have good ones right now that's meeting enough of the needs, but like, we have to find solutions, people. And some of us have been looking for solutions, and we found some that in a tinkerer's way are beginning to solve some problems. And so there are those that are doing that. And even my coming onto TikTok has been, like, how are you going to use this platform? Because I'll be honest with you, I've been scared to be out here. Like, I have been like checking my emotional health in some of the lives that I've joined in, where it's like, okay, can you be out here and still leave the TikTok universe healthy? It's been kind of scary, but part of it is I have been working on this, and I have some of that insight that I think is relevant. And there's probably some other shifters out here in the universe too that are looking to connect. Like, we need each other. I need the expertise and the experience of other paradigm shifters who have been tinkering with some of these solutions. And like, maybe you have been deep diving into the economics piece, but maybe I have been deep diving into the healing piece. And what if we came together because we could begin solving more of the problems? Some of the other ways that that's expressing in my life since retirement this year, it's last year. Last year I retired May 31st of last year. I liquidated the farm and shut it down. But it's giving me space to go back to one of the intentional community projects that I started like a decade ago, of like building physical spaces in community that invest in the social tech piece, the how do people live sustainably with each other, and then bring all of my insight and hopefully others about housing and water and power and food and economics, and add that together. Like, how do we do the whole mind, body, and soul part in really building places for people, especially people like me who are developing non-negotiables as to how we're going to live. Like, we're going to heal, and we're going to live lives that are much more sustainable than our mothers and our grandmothers. Like, we're going to live lives of joy, live lives from a healed perspective, like where we intentionally are going out into the world, trying to be healing water to everybody that comes into our path. Like, can we create some of those spaces that test and play with some of our tinkerings for how to do it in mass? I like the idea of prototype. Like, let's figure out if we could get 10 people to live together and heal together and develop economics that fit into some of these new models. Like, let's see if we could actually do this in small scale. And if so, can we then figure out how to scale it to a much larger platform? That for me has been a comfortable space, the tinkering space. And some of these tools have really helped me to find others that are on kind of the same page and with the same kind of intentions. And that's what I'm hoping this space is that this space of TikTok gives me the opportunity to do, to really connect with those others, where we're able to, let me compare notes. What have you been working on in life? Like, what is the deep dive that you've been doing, and what's that insight that you've got? What are those unsolvable problems you've been solving in your space? And like, what if we kind of connected and began to share information with each other? And man, I'm so glad, because this digital space like opens up the windows of being able to connect with people that aren't in my region. I'm in the deep south, and some of these ideas and thinking are very strange in a lot of the communities that I live in. But with this platform, my hope is that I'll be able to connect with others that want to have those conversations, that want to talk specifically about the healing component of it. Like, if we did that first, would it make all of the other stuff much easier? If we did some healing stuff first, could we deal with the stuff that's the male-female issues that I'm seeing, especially in the Black community? Can we deal with the Black-white issues? If we got a little bit of healing first, could we deal with some of these issues at the core? Like, let's get to the real core of issues and not window dress it with Band-Aids anymore. And so I'm hoping that through this platform, I will find affinity with others who are really wanting to have those conversations, whose intentions are towards the same goal. I want community to be better. I want there to be places where my grandchildren and their children can thrive, that they don't have to buy into the old systems that in some ways were very destructive to just our soul. I want them to have freedoms to truly live their passions and feel supported in that, in love. And so I'm looking to find others that are really serious about doing that, serious in the way that you do your personal work too. Not serious. I'm looking for people who don't just want to say, that would be a good idea, but I'm not really willing to do any personal work so that I can be that kind of person. I'm looking for those that are saying, man, I've been doing this personal work because I knew that I was a part of the problem with community. My dysfunction was adding to the mix in the community and the circles that I lived in. Like, I'm trying to find those that are saying, and so what I did was I started healing to the best of my ability, and I started really learning and diving deeper into those areas of my passion, and that I feel I'm part of the solution. So I'm hoping that this platform lets me make those kinds of connections, lets me share some of the things that I found. Like, I'm opening up my notebook on things that have kind of helped me. These have been those places along this crazy, windy journey where I've picked up tools one at a time and really incorporated them into some of the solutions that I work with, in some of the consulting and coaching work that I do now that I've got time to in my retirement. So if that resonates with you, if you want to have the conversations, if you want to really talk about some of those core things, especially if you want to talk about healing being the core of how we fix a lot of the issues much faster, because it doesn't mean that I think that any of the things that are happening are bad in and of themselves, but I am focused specifically on what's the quickest, fastest way that we can get change. What's the quickest, fastest, most efficient way that we can get us to a better place. And so for me, we got to be doing a whole lot of things at the same time. We got to be dealing with things like food and economics and people having the sense of connection and healing and learning processing tools and increasing their emotional intelligence and a whole bunch of other things, that are regenerative at the same time. And so for me, strategically, if we address healing first, or as one of the things that we put an investment in while we're doing the other things, I think strategically that will get us a whole lot further forward as we really try to heal and create a better way of living. That's my goal. And so if those of you want to connect in that space, I'd love for you to follow me or send me a message so that I can figure out how to flag you and be watching for your lives or connecting to be able to have some of these conversations in real time as we start putting solutions together and putting them into the practical space. Some of my tinkering, I've been fortunate enough being self-employed. I've had the flexibility in my life that I've self-funded some of the tinkerings. I played with the food system because I needed to understand. I played with the faith systems. I needed to understand. I dabbled in politics because I wanted to understand. And I want to share that. I believe that there's others that have been having this windy journey, and they're at the same place right now, too, to say, we've got to do this healing thing. And we've got to do it so that we can even have the conversations sometimes that we need to have and to be able to do the deeper levels of healing. We need to start taking the layers off. So I'm hoping to be able to connect with people that really want to share notes about how we're going to do something about this and change it. Many of us are doing those things in our individual lives, but we see what's happening around us and we want to join forces and be able to do more. And so I'm hoping to find people that really are in that space of wanting to do more and wanting to do more by connecting. Community is one of those strange things that it's great to do theoretical work, but you can't do community unless you're doing it with people. And so some of the work that I plan on doing in this newfound retirement time is building some intentional communities. The intentional community that I'm working on here in the United States is in Georgia. I've got land in central Georgia. So if that region is appealing to anyone and you're looking at really doing the nuts and bolts of physical community building, love to connect with you. I've got land. I've got a vision. It needs people. But it would be a fun project for those that are really looking to be in that intentional community space. There's been a growing resurgence of interest in that, and so I'm excited to see that. I'm excited to see people of color seeing that as a potential option for creating spaces that feel supportive and life-affirming, because I feel like people should live with that kind of environment. And sometimes creating that niche for your life is one of the benefits that intentional communities give. And you can define the niche however you want to. This particular community, the project is would be a really good fit for those that are social scientists, people that are thinking with how we create the future, how we build the bridge from where we are to the future with solutions, especially holistic solutions. It would be a good fit for people who are tinkering with things like power and water and food and commerce. It would be a good fit for people who are already teaching in that space and want to create that community space where their whole life can be much more integrated. It would be a good fit for that. It would be a good fit with social tinkerers who say, life just isn't affirming for me. Like life does not feel good for me right now, and I want to create a new life and kind of start from scratch. The particular property has a lot of benefits, strategically located there, but one of the benefits is that it's in a county in Georgia that has does not have zoning code enforcements. And one of my hobby-like passions is all of the different styles of housing that we have access to now with technology. So everything from the simplified side, like cordwood building, to kind of now where we're going, and some of my interests are with like hempcrete and whether or not hemp could be a really good product for creating ultra cheap housing. So for someone who really likes tinkering with that and is also concerned with the components, this particular property does not have zoning enforcement. So it really is kind of the wild, wild west of opportunities for being able to build and tinker with options. I like the tiny house concept. I like I'm on the minimalistic scale a bit more. And so I like not having to spend so much life energy maintaining like housing. Like I don't want to vacuum floors, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time doing housekeeping and things like laundry. So I opt for a much more minimalistic, but I appreciate privacy. You know, I am one of those introverted, extroverted kinds of people. Like when I like being alone, I like being in the Batcave. I don't want to be bothered. It's not because I don't like people. I just don't want you in my space. And so I want to have that sense of privacy. Other people have different needs, and co-housing in different ways might be an option there. But I'm looking for people that are looking to tinker with that in a real space. If you want to connect with that project, the IC.org, it's the Intentional Community Federation, but it's ic.org, and you can find out about just kind of the conceptual pieces of that project under, if you look under Georgia or search Deep Step Collective. Deep Step is one word. It really is Deep Step because that's the city it's in, Deep Step, which I think is hilarious because people say, you like got land where? Yeah, Deep Step, Georgia. You never heard of it? Yeah, Deep Step. It's way out there. But it's within 15 miles of a college community, and it's got some real neat sustainability pieces like being over one of the main aquifers in Georgia and a couple of other things. One being, though, the lack of zoning enforcement, which lets me be able to think of this place as an experimental site. So if you're interested in that, the ic.org site, you can look up Deep Step Collective. And then the other project is my project in Ecuador, because I made a decision to live in Ecuador part-time and have a space there that I am really kind of developing the vision for, but would love for it to be a space, maybe as a part-time landing space, but really eclectic, intentional community for 3 or 4 people specifically that are in the healing space that want to join forces specifically for healing. One of the things I do in my retirement is I do healing retreats. I enjoy doing them. They're always a weekend or a week long, and then I'm really done with the work part of it. So it lets me have a very short attention span. But I'd love to find others that want to build community and maybe do some collective kinds of healing work together. So I'm looking for people with different modalities that specifically have an interest in perhaps expatriate living, specifically an interest in Ecuador. And I've got a space there that's got room for 4 additional people. It's a co-housing situation there. But if individuals are interested in that concept, especially those that find themselves into that shifter category and alternative healing modalities, whether it be food or body work or energy healing or other kind fitness, I would love to find and partner with some people there. The economics of doing community in Ecuador is just, it's a game changer for me. Like, I would not have imagined like underwriting the cost of another project here in the States, but thinking about putting some more investment into the Deep Step project, like the economics of Ecuadorian living just is mind blowing. So I'm really excited about that. And about getting back down there and spending some more time there, really learning the community. But if there's interest in that, definitely would love to reach out and connect. So my hopes is being on this platform will let me find others that have some of the common interests and want to tinker together. So I love talking with people and sharing ideas, because ideas spark, when you're with those kind of people, it just sparks other ideas and creativity. So being a little bit isolated from sometimes having those conversations in my physical local community, I'm excited about having this platform and being able to connect with others who want to be challenged and be sparked by other peers that are doing this work. So I'm excited to be here. I'm going to learn this platform to figure out how to do these lives more often. And I'll keep looking and trying to connect with others. If you see my posts or see the feeds of the videos and are interested, definitely send me a note and let me know how we can be connected. Let me know what you're doing that's solving problems. Let me know what your out-of-the-box work is right now, because it's probably something that could be very exciting for us to kind of talk about and learn from each other, because that is something that I really find valuable. Some of us tinkerers know lots of stuff about a lot of things because we are all over the place. People tell me, like, how do you know so much about stuff? And it's like I learn for a hobby. Like, I know a lot of things about a lot of things because I have a really broad base of interests. And it's those tidbits that I get from interacting with people that are very different from me, yet we're the same. You know, I find shifters who are in a totally different field, and like they enlighten me on some area of technology that I am clueless on. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And I can appreciate that, but it also gives me more data that takes into other areas, because learning in these different areas lets me like have random tidbits from some other area of life, some other segment of community. And like, because I have that knowledge, I'll get into a situation with farming and it's like, wait a minute, I know a principle that's relevant to something else, but that transfers. And now I have a solution for this situation. And so being able to find others that are in this same line of thinking, but that yet may be very well versed in another area, whether it be of healing or of community development, like, I love to connect with those kind of people. So I'm really excited about being able to find each other in this space called TikTok. And so I have pushed myself to learn this technology and push past my insecurities about going live. And I'm going to do that more so that I gain a little more comfort. I now know how to take someone off of the live feed that joins in that I then don't want to be joined in. So I'm learning. That's my new lesson for today. And I'll play with it more and see what else I can find. So those of you that have come in and have shared with me and let me kind of do my ramble from my chair this morning, thank you. Thank you for letting me share. And a little bit of help there to help me find the right button to push and get the person disconnected. I just needed that little bit of emotional support. Thank you for being my cheerleaders and being patient while I learn the buttons down here. And I look forward to connecting with others who share similar passions in life. So if fixing community, if repioneering society is part of your personally selected life mission, I'd love to connect with you and begin sharing our journeys and sharing our tools and seeing how we can do more together. So I'm going to exit out, and I look forward to connecting with you. Feel free to follow me, send me a message to let me know that we've got some affinities, and let me know to put you on my radar to be watching out for you when you're doing lives and having conversations. So, Happy New Year. Have a great day. Look forward to chatting and connecting with you soon.